Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when and where you're watching this webinar. My name is JB Fowler, and I'm excited to help you get a better understanding of Domotz and how to get started with Domotz. But let's go over a few housekeeping items first. Because of the nature of this scheduled training, we've recorded my portion of the presentation, but we have folks from our support and sales teams monitoring the questions and chat during this presentation. Please use the questions window within the GoToWebinar control panel to ask your questions. Depending on the question or the comments, one of our team members may present some of the relevant questions at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, the team will respond via the questions panel. Please note that for more detailed questions, feel free to email our support team directly at support@domotz.com. Let's go over today's agenda. Today, discussed in this demo will be things such as the core value proposition of Domotz and how Domotz works. We'll talk about some examples, creating an account info and branding, billing and agent activation. We'll also talk about some of the finer details like network setup, device properties, the network device documentation aspects of Domotz, as well as alerts and remote connectivity. And then at the end, we'll give an overview of the 201 demo, which goes into a little bit more details. Let's first talk about how managed service providers and integrators use Domotz across the world. First and foremost, Domotz is a cloud-based software as a service. Integrators and managed service providers alike use us for asset management and documentation purposes because of the way in which we classify the network. They use us for, of course, network management and diagnosing problems that go on the network. But then they also use us for security and awareness. One of the things that's critical to cybersecurity and understanding some of the more secure processes like NIST and SOC and CMMC is really having an awareness of what your network infrastructure looks like, as well as the devices on the network. And you'll see through some of our demos and through some of the things that we can do, how Domotz can be utilized for all three of these in a very effective way. Ultimately, Domotz is about helping you be more efficient with running your business and ultimately generating customer loyalty. The way in which we can do that is through how we discover devices that are on the network. Domotz does an excellent job of classifying every single device that has a MAC address that's associated with the networks that you're monitoring. We can classify devices by not only their manufacturer, but also their make, model, and type. We'll give you information such as their MAC address, their IP address, and above all, telling you things like application protocols that are being broadcasted by those devices, really helping you get awareness of what's on your networks that you're monitoring, as well as some of the ports that you can use for management. One thing that Domotz is really effective at is proactive monitoring and alerting. Once we've discovered all the devices on the network and we've interrogated the network infrastructure and mapped all of that out for you, you can then go in and set alerts on devices that you care about. You can monitor important devices, whether it's the network infrastructure itself, or you can monitor subsystems on that network. So that way, the experience that your customers have or your clients have is what they need, and it really helps fulfill that service level agreement in a very proactive way, as opposed to the break-fix model that so many people have used in the past. When a device does run into an issue or when the network has an issue, being able Well, everybody, it seems that a few people are having trouble with the video, so we'll just go to a live demo here. Let me share my presentation, and we'll have people standing by to answer questions here. So I apologize for the difficulty with this. Let us do this. Let me bring up to the page that we were on, and we will start it. Always fun dealing with these types of things. How about that one? I assume y'all can see, well, you can see that, not the right screen. There we go. Okay. Sorry for the trouble. We'll sort that out with GoToWebinar here later. We will go through this manually then. Domotz, to get where it left off, fundamentally Domotz is an IoT or as a network management solution that does a really good job with discovery and classification of all the devices on the network. Our real value comes down to how we classify all of these devices that are on the network by make, model, and type, and we'll show some of that in this demo. Domotz also can proactively monitor and manage and really alert you to all these devices that are on the network. The idea behind this is how you can, set alerts that you need to and that you care about in your systems. We're going to talk a little bit about the dashboarding capabilities and the customizations, although we get more in detail in that in the 201 webinar. When it comes to secure connectivity and management, that's one of the things that makes Domotz a little bit more unique. Each and every device that's on the network gets discovered, and we look at all of the ports that are available for management of those devices, whether they're Telnet, SSH, web-based connectivity ports, or even RDP. We look at that. And then last, but certainly not least, the idea is how can we help you scale better? How can we help you be more efficient? We make it easy for you to rapidly deploy and even troubleshoot these devices and these systems that you're deploying. Ultimately for us, it's about making you more efficient. It's about building customer loyalty, helping you get out of a break-fix model, go into more of a proactive type of monitoring of systems. So with that being said, I really like to just get straight into the demo. So let's close this thing down for a minute. One of the things you're going to see here when you first open up Domotz is our dashboard. I'm going to open up some notes pages here so I can make sure that we touch on all of the key points that we want to talk about. When Domotz is first started and the thing you're going to notice is that it's a cloud-based solution. Okay, we are managed by AWS. We can talk a little bit more about that later on, but fundamentally we have servers throughout the world. We have what we call tentacles throughout the world to help with speed and performance, but ultimately we are a cloud-based solution. When you deploy Domotz, you do need to install what we call an agent. There is a single agent per network that needs to be deployed. Those agents can be either Windows or Linux-based. There is a black box. It's available on Amazon. Think of it as a mini server that you could easily deploy as well. Information about that is within the portal when you sign in. So at portal.domotz.com and under the Devices tab, we'll show that later. But then also, I want to let you know that there's a third part of Domotz. So you have the cloud, you have the agent, you also have the application. Today, I'm showing this webinar here on our desktop application, which is, in my case, Mac-based, but we have a Windows-based application. We also have browser-based applications. So even if you're on your, on a tablet or you're roaming around in some other area and you don't have your PC with you, you can use that. And lastly, and a lot of people don't realize this, but we also have a dedicated mobile application for iOS and Android. So regardless of where you are, even if you're on vacation, not that you want to take work with you, but if you need to access your customer systems or make sure that things are operating as expected, you can check in on that with the mobile app too. We can dive into details here about the account creation, but I do want to show a couple of important examples that I think will help resonate with a lot of service providers and integrators that are out there. As we get out of that NOC view, that network operations center view, really what you're going to see with Domotz is the ability to map the network, ultimately discovering all of the different devices that are on the network. We're going to dive into details about how we do that. But a few things you'll note is as we discover and classify all of these devices on the network, we can easily do things like check out NAS drives. We can set up SNMP alerts on these things. So we can look at storage, CPU utilization. We can dive into servers and virtual machines. We can dive into printers as well, looking at different things like ink levels of these printers, and we help you see all of that. Other things that that we will do when it comes to, let's see if this device is somewhere in my network. We can look at servers that are out there, whether they are virtualized or actual servers, and we can check out information about the system, looking at the architecture that they're on, the CPU, all the vendor information, any operating system details. And we can get into some of the more physical and logical information about hard drives that are set up on these devices. So this is just some of the power that Domotz has. The last thing that I'll mention, and I've actually seen a couple discussions on places like Reddit and some of the other forums that are out there that have to do with power cycling. One of the beautiful things about Domotz is how we can take and discover PDUs or manage switches that are have PoE, and we can see those devices. We have drivers set up for them so that we can associate devices on the network with the outlets or with the PoE ports, and then we can power cycle them directly through Domotz. In the case of some of the different network switches that are out there, like if we just go to probably one of these first switches, we'll see that when we discover these devices, an interface tab pops up. We can see that these particular security cameras have PoE, but we can also power cycle them here if we wanted to do that. So just ways of quickly managing these. We'll show more details about how to connect to these devices in this discussion, but let's first talk about account creation. Now, I assume that a lot of you have already done this since you're here watching this webinar, but let's talk a little bit about the details behind this. One of the things I want to point out is how is the Domotz architecture of teams really set up? When you guys created an account under the email address that you created, you set yourself up as a team master. As a team master, you have the ability to create what we call team members or even field operators. The key difference between a team master and a team member fundamentally is the fact that a team master deals with billing. They also deal with the ability to add more team members or field operators. That's the primary difference. The team master and team members can see all of the agents that are out there, all of the different networks that you are monitoring, while field operators are actually associated only to the agents or the networks that you assign them to. So it's a way of minimizing exposure or minimizing risk to you as a service provider, and really even to your customers that are out there. A couple things that I will point out here as I close this thing down is the fact that when you go into your account and you go into the team management page, a browser will open up into your portal. But then once this gets opened up, you'll see the different team members that you have associated with your account. But a few things I do want to point out. One is 2FA, right? Domotz does have the ability to set multi-factor authentication to your account, and I highly recommend that you do that for all your users. Since I'm using this as a demo account, I've chosen not to do that. It's very easy for you to set up 2FA. If you go to your account settings, you can go to two-factor authentication. You'll also notice right next to that is SAML and SSO. So if you have the need, or if you do use some sort of single sign-on service, whether it's through Azure, Jump Cloud, Evo, Okta, you can set that up. Even if you have a third-party service that's using standard SAML or SAML 2.0, then you should be able to configure Domotz to have visibility in that, which really allows all of your team members or field operators to be able to sign in through that single sign-on service. You do still need to create a user account within Domotz for that person, but at least they can access Domotz through their own single sign-on service. Okay, let's talk a little bit, since we're here, let's talk a little bit about your account and some of the things you can do. You'll notice that on the info tab here, you can go in and set up your details. You can set up information about your company. You can even get into some of the branding. You can put your logo into the Domotz application. You can use information about your email, your phone number, and have that associated to customized reports. The beauty of that is being able to send that information out to your clients. When you look at all of your agents that are out there, this is where you're going to see some of the branding, but also when we talk about reports and how you can customize these, that's where you're going to really get into the details of that. Let's go talk a little bit while we're still on your account also about billing information. So going back into, we can just go to the account and billing section. I do want to point out a few things here. First of all, this is where you can enter in your credit card information into your account. You can change that at any time as needed. With your billing, you'll see these invoices history. Since you guys are new to Domotz, I want to point out a few things about the 21-day trial. Just so you know, if you're in the trial phase right now, you can enter your credit card information at any time. Your billing cycle will not start until after that 21-day trial ends. Just so you also know, once that billing date starts, that's when all the agents that you set up will start with that billing. The other point that I want to make, and this is as you are continuing on, we get a lot of questions on this in our support channel, and that is the fact that Domotz agents are not prorated. So if your billing cycle occurs on, let's say, the 20th of each month, then anytime that you install an agent before the 20th, we are going to basically note that agent will be charged on your billing cycle, but you will also be billed for the next month that's coming up. All of our billing that we do is essentially at the beginning of each billing cycle for the following month or for the next month. So just be aware of that. It may look like you had 2 charges for a single agent on your network, but that really is just how we have to handle our billing cycles. Okay, let's talk about adding an agent. Okay. So you've set up the account, you've added team members, you've set up 2FA and any of the branding details that you want. The very next thing that you really need to make sure you're doing, and quite frankly, I assume some of you have already done this, whether you've done this through the Synology NAS drive or you've downloaded our Windows agent, you do need to activate that agent. So when it comes to Windows or Linux-based systems, you have a lot of choices that are out here. You can install agents on NAS drives. I mentioned as well that black box. You'll notice that on Amazon, you can find that for $109, or even in Europe, you can find it for the Euro-based pricing. So that stuff is there for you to activate. The differences between these, we get a lot of questions on that. First and foremost, I'll talk about the black box. The Domotz black box is kind of a self-contained system. It's running on Ubuntu Core. The beauty of Ubuntu Core is it allows Domotz to actively monitor and manage those agents to make sure that they're continuously up to date. We can not only update the application in real time, but we also can update the operating system, which is a fundamental value of Ubuntu Core as an OS. When it comes to setting up VLANs, when it comes to managing that network interface card, the Domotz box is really, really easy to do. You just go to the device's web page, and then you can configure that network interface. For all the other agents that are out there, the application themselves, or the Domotz application that's running within the host, is updated proactively, but you have to maintain the Linux OS or the Windows OS to make sure that it's always up to date and managed appropriately. Many of you are doing this already through your traditional RMM tools, but just be aware that you do need to actively maintain that. When it comes to setting up VLANs, right, dealing with the network interface card, it's up to the host, it's up to the virtual machine that you may have put the agent in. On Synology, on Netgear, on ReadyNAS or QNAP, on NAS drives, there are ways for you to configure the network interface cards, but that is very specific to the NAS drive itself. The easiest thing to do is deploying, the Domotz black box, but the Windows agent is also very easy to use if you are deploying the system. So keep those things in mind as you are activating these systems. When you go to activate, once you've set up, and by the way, you'll notice that if you click on any one of these, I just clicked on Docker here, we will take you to the help page. We will provide you with information about how to download a particular image if that's appropriate, or we'll just start downloading the Windows executable for you. So to be aware of that. Once you have the agent activated, after you followed those instructions, the idea then is to log into that device. You need to go to the IP address assigned by the router and then go to port 3000 of that. Port 3000 is what the Domotz agent uses for its web-based port. Once you insert your username and password that you've created, whether you are the team master or you are a team member or field operator, you can activate that agent within your account. You do want to then name the agent appropriately. A couple things that we'll talk about are naming conventions. For instance, when you look at all these different agents, which I have in my account, you'll notice that they're named in a very haphazard type of way. My suggestion to you is always to come up with a naming convention that makes sense for you and your company. So that way you can easily find customers, as well as prioritize or sort customers within this screen. Once you activate the agent, once you give it a name, the Domotz agent will actually start to scan the network. It'll start doing its thing automatically. A couple things that I will say as we go into, let's just use this site here as an example. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to really, depending on the size of your network, of course, to really go over all of these systems and start to classify it. Once we've done our ARP request, done our pinging, looking at which devices are there, trying to enrich it, what we'll do is also start to classify these devices by the type that they are. A couple of examples that I want to show you. So if we just take this particular managed switch here, you'll notice a few things like we not only grab all the MAC address details, we'll go up to layer 3 and look at the IP addresses. We'll look for which services, which TCP services are available. We fundamentally do this for management purposes on this. We will also look at the different application layer information that's being broadcasted by these particular devices. In the end, what we're trying to do is give you that make, model, and type so that you don't have to spend time trying to figure out what MAC address is what, or what IP address is associated to which MAC address. We're trying to make this as simple as possible for you. The one thing that you will notice in all of our systems is that, especially when it comes to network infrastructure, we provide you the ability to either add credentials to that if there are potentially associated drivers that we have with this, or at a minimum add SNMP information. When it comes to SNMP, you can add things like version 1, 2, or 3, as well as all of the authentication types and encryption types that are associated with that version of SNMP. Once we have that information, if it's not using the default, then what we're going to do is start to interrogate the network for which devices are sitting on which ports, and then ultimately, and as I showed before, trying to build out a network topology that makes the most sense. In our minds, it's about building out that network infrastructure. We did get a couple questions last time that I do want to point out, and that is the network topology works with switches, any switches that are running particular protocols, RFC 4188. We have information about this network discovery and how it happens on our help forums, or help.domotz.com, so you can read about that. But one of the things that people often aren't aware of is the fact that if we discover that on a managed switch that there are multiple devices associated to a particular port, maybe it's because it's going through an unmanaged switch of some sort. think even on this particular switch, we may see some of these. So one of these devices has it. But you can then associate, here's a great example where 3 devices can be reached on this device. You actually have the ability to come in here and set up an unmanaged switch or give it a name, add a hub, whatever it may be, that can then fix what I would call the parent-child relationship within the topology map. So be aware of that as devices are getting discovered. You have some flexibility into how you can control a lot of the devices and their associations on these switches. Last thing I want to mention when it comes to network discovery, we pointed out the fact that Domotz can discover VLANs. We also can look at different subnets that are associated, routed subnets within your network. When it comes to configuring the VLAN, recommendation is to follow the instructions because this is very specific to the network interface card that you're using. Okay, so if you are on a Windows machine, you need to make sure that you have access to that NIC. Same with Linux, same with virtual machines. You need to make sure that the VM is set up appropriately. Once you have configured the VLANs, the Domotz agent will automatically start scanning for the different interfaces that are out there and bringing back data on all of those. When it comes to subnets, right, you can easily add private subnets. I think on this particular site, we'll see an example where we've added like a modem, if I'm not mistaken. So we can look outside the routed LAN to the modem that's just on the other side of the router. Of course, you can set up a range. You'll notice here I'm doing a CIDR of /24, but you can set that to a very specific range, really /24 or smaller for this. But it gives you the ability to scan for multiple devices that may be in a private subnet. Examples of this would be for security systems, security cameras. Usually they're routed on a separate VLAN. You could do this for point of sale systems where you're trying to deal with PCI compliance, but you still want to make sure those devices are active and online. Another thing that you have the ability to do with Domotz is look at external hosts. So here you can check the status from the point of view of the agent on that network with URLs or IP addresses that are outside the scope, really out in the cloud is the assumed use of this. In this example, you can see that I'm pinging this BlueJeans server. It's out here, just checking to see if voice over IP services are working. But we'll get into some of the details when we talk about network diagnostics in 201. But by doing this, we can not only set up alerts if that particular host goes down, but we also have the ability to look at the performance from, again, the point of view of the agent. I give you all of this information just to make sure that you guys understand that those capabilities are there. We'll talk about more details of discovering devices as well as dealing with hosted services for gear that you have, equipment that you have in your network. And we'll talk about that actually more in the 201 class. Let's talk a little bit about device properties, just to make sure that you're all aware of how these things work. When I go into any particular device that's on here, let's just go look at this Northeast camera here. A few things that I will point out, while we try to discover as much information about these devices as we can, you absolutely can come in here and give it a more user-friendly name if we did not discover a name that seemed appropriate to your setup, or if you have some sort of nomenclature that you care about, you can go in there and set all that up. One thing that we do not add to this is location and zone information. So in this case, this particular camera is sitting on the front porch in a second floor location. If you are dealing with conference rooms, boardrooms, where you have smart displays, unified communications equipment, maybe you have specific locations for servers or NAS drives, this is where you guys can configure this information. I will point out as well, and I mentioned this before, but I want to say it again, when it comes to particular devices, if you know that they have SNMP capabilities and you know those credentials, you can set those up inside this info tab within each one of these devices that are out here. One thing that's a unique trick that I want to give you guys detail, when you are first configuring a particular system, you can come up in the desktop application only. So this would be a Windows or Mac-based desktop application. You can go to the device list page of everything that was discovered. You can export this device list to an Excel file. Here, I'll just store this on my desktop. And then let me go find that on my desktop and open this up for you so you guys can get a view as to what this actually looks like. I have way too many things on my desktop here. So I'm opening it up now. Let me bring it up to the window that's displayed. The cool thing about this particular page is that we're going to put it in a way that allows you to easily filter and sort. We're going to show all the information that we've discovered about these particular devices. In this case, I have a bulk of these devices already configured for location and zone, but let's just say, let's go look at those cameras again. Let's say I wanted to sort by only the cameras that we have filtered or discovered. And then I want to add details like this hike vision camera. Maybe it's in, basement, whatever, okay? You can easily save this information. You can add notes about this device, whether you want to put in the username, the passwords, whatever you feel like the details are. If you want to go in and change the names of these, you can do that in a mass form. Okay, you can do that in one large. You can then save off this file. I'm not going to do it here since this is configured for demo purposes, but once you save it off, just say don't save. Once you've saved it, you can then come in and import all that information back into the cloud. And all of those details will be configured for you automatically. Okay. Really, really convenient when it comes to initial setup of particular systems. A few other things that we're going to show later on, and it's really in the 201, but when it comes to doing mass edit, right, being able to search and manage across multiple systems and then configure those all at once using templates, so you can set up one site and find all of those different devices that you care about and set up those templates. We are going to go into way more details about that in the 201 class. So being able to sort by things like Cisco phones and then take all the properties associated with these devices and push them to multiple, even hundreds of systems at one time is done easily through Domotz in the search and manage feature. I encourage you guys to play with it. So, okay. We've talked about setting up the devices, the discovery of all these devices, importing and exporting information through simple device lists and making modifications to those. The next thing that I want you guys to think about is that proactive monitoring side of Domotz. So when we get into, I'm going to use this IoT lab again, just for simplicity and because I know there's a lot of things set up in this. When we get to alerting, each and every device can have its own individual alerts, but before we talk about how to set those up, let's talk about the different types of alerts that are here. A few things that you'll notice is that there are network-based alerts where we can look for network connections being lost or recovered, meaning that the agent is no longer communicating with the Domotz service. That could be for a number of different things, such as an ISP going down. It could be a power outage. It could be that somebody unplugged the network cable, right? There's lots of reasons that could go down. But if that happens, you can get alerts on that. We can do things as well at the network level. One of the things that Domotz does a really good job of is continuously scanning the network and looking for new devices that are on that network. You can get alerts on those, whether you're looking at them as security vulnerabilities or potential issues on what is supposed to be a fairly static network, or whether you're just looking for when new people are getting on certain networks. You can do that. Domotz will also look at TCP ports being opened up on the WAN side of your router or your gateway, and we'll look for UPnP ports being opened from the LAN side out to the WAN if you are using UPnP. We'll talk about that again, a little bit more details in the 201, but these are some of the capabilities that Domotz has. When it comes to just general changes on the LAN or even at the public IP address side, right, the one that the ISP has given you, if that happens, if you have a failover system, if you have redundant routers or redundant services from an ISP point of view, we can update you to the changes on that as well. And last but not least, of course, you can set up at the network just general network performance. This mostly is looking at ISP performance, so going from the agent on the local area network out to the cloud using a speed test service. I think you've seen this already, but you'll notice that Domotz can use things like speed test, use FAST. We can use MLab. We can configure systems for speedtest.net or Ookla, but we rarely do that just because of the way that they do testing. A few things I'll point out while I'm here talking about the ISP speed tests is that this is extremely variable. It is based off of not only network conditions on your local area network, but also the system that the agent is hosted on, as well as other conditions, such as what traffic's going on in the switch. How far down do you have the agent in the network hierarchy? As most of you know, you should probably put a service like this closest to the router or the ISP modem as possible. But just be aware that all of these types of issues highlighted here in this can affect this ISP performance. You can do route analysis. You can just get general info about the network itself from this page. Now, again, going back to alerts, all of these things can be configured through Domotz, and you can set thresholds as to where you get triggers on these. When it comes to device alerts, a lot of power in these. Let's just pick a particular. We'll look at this Latte Panda, which is not online right now. You can easily set up specific alerts on the status of the device, whether it's up or down, if its IP address changes. You can also look at heartbeat loss, but my recommendation for you is to avoid heartbeat loss unless you have a very critical system. When we talk about heartbeats, we really talk about ICMP requests or echo requests, which are also known as pings. There are many situations where pings will get lost on a network. Unless you have a device that's on a very high priority, or it's really critical in your system and you need to make sure that these pings are not lost, I recommend you just deal with the device goes up or down. You can, and we'll talk about this, but you can set up up-down status to be at a particular time window. By default, we're checking wired devices once every 2 minutes. For some wireless devices that are typically low power Wi-Fi devices, we'll usually set that up to be every 10 minutes. But that is variable and you can set that up as appropriate. We can look at specific TCP services being open. So these are the ports that you can use for managing devices. These could also be services that are running on a particular device or in a particular application on a hosted system. A lot of times people are looking at web pages, looking at port 443, analyzing that those are actually functioning on a particular device. Of course, if you want to look at something like RDP on a particular device, remote desktop protocol, make sure that that's running, you can do that as well. You can set up SNMP services, and we'll talk about that in pretty great detail here in the 201 session. But I do want to make sure that you're aware that you can go in and configure SNMP services on device. And lastly, we can look at device performance on that network. We call it round trip delay. You can call it latency. Essentially what we're doing, those pings that we're doing to each and every device from the point of view of the agent, we are looking at those and measuring the metrics associated with that. And then if there are a particular amount of packet loss that's greater than a certain threshold that you can configure, or if you see the average latency, the median latency going above that threshold, you also can trigger alerts. So these are the types, everything that I just talked about, whether it was on the network or the device, are the types of events that can trigger alerts. Let's talk a little bit about the alerts themselves. The way that our alerts work is you can do personal alerts, which I'm highlighted here, where you can set up either email alerts to the account that you're logged in at. So here I'm logged in as jbfowler@gmail.com, or you can do push notifications to the mobile alert. Okay, so that is also possible. So if you have the mobile app, we can set alerts to go to that. These are how you do personal alerts. But where the real power of Domotz comes in is what we call shared alerts. And I will tell you that we're going to go in more details of actually setting up the shared alerts in the 201 demo. I do want to point out that if you go to the alerts setting on the left-hand column, you'll see, and for those of you that know or you have ticketing systems, PSA tools, you want to configure messaging systems, maybe you're familiar with webhooks, you can easily go in here and set some of this information up. If you need details about this before and you're excited to try this out before you can watch the 201 class, I highly recommend that you go to help.domotz.com, click on the system that you care about, or even if you go to the home page, you should see that there's lots of help when it comes to PSA ticketing systems, PSA and ticketing systems, and the integration into these pages. So as a reminder, help.domotz.com is a very important and useful tool for you. The beauty of shared alerts, and the reason we call them shared alerts, is because you can set up multiple channels to push notifications across. As I've already mentioned, right, you can set up a PSA tool or ticketing system to essentially create a new ticket when a particular event is triggered on the network. You also can do things at the same time, like push notifications to a messaging tool such as Slack or Teams. We even have Telegram services now available. You also can set up secondary emails that you can push notifications to if that's what you want to do. A good example of secondary notifications would be something like support@mycompany.com. When you go to edit these, you'll see that not only can you select which events you want to have trigger the alert, but you also can set up which channels, you can color code them, you can name them. All of this will be a few more, or we'll go into a few more details about that in the 201 training. This is really about awareness of what's out there and the power of being able to do this. Let's assume that you've set up alerts now on your agents. You set them across maybe one or more agents that are out there. And now what you want to do is when you actually have an issue that is on a device, you want to connect to it. We haven't talked at all about how you can do that, but let's address that. When we find particular devices, I always use these managed switches as examples because they're good network infrastructure devices. I mentioned that we scan devices for TCP services. You'll notice that Domotz has, I will say, you'll notice when you first discover all these devices that if a particular port for management is available, we're going to show that inside this connections tab. If you know of a particular TCP service or port that is that can be open that we have not discovered, maybe because it's a proprietary port, you can either create a custom connection to that exact port based on the protocol that you want to use, or what most people will do is create an actual TCP tunnel to that system, and it'll be a direct connection, at which point you can use whatever tool, whether it's a third-party tool or a browser or a Telnet or SSH client to connect to that device over that specific port. Just to show you the power of this, when we do create a connection, I'm just going to port 80 for management. What is happening here is you're basically telling the agent to create a secure URL in the cloud that you can then connect to in the cloud, where it is not only encrypted, but also then re-encrypted as it goes back down into that remote network. And here you can see that I now can access this particular device's web page, assuming I get the password right. This URL that's up here is unique to my laptop at my address. Even if I were to hand it off to a colleague in the same office, they would not be able to utilize this URL that's here. So that's one of the nice things about this service. This connection is temporary. it stays open for less than an hour. We do that for security purposes. Of course, at this point, you can see now if you wanted to go in here and configure VLANs, if you wanted to go in and save off the config files, do firmware updates, you can do any of that right here from your PC, regardless of where that network is. So this is one of the powerful features that Domotz has when it comes to that connection. It's also about the discovery of these ports. Now, this is a way to connect to each individual system. By the way, before I forget, I want to talk about configuration management. So when we discover network infrastructure devices, such as managed switches and firewalls, as you guys know, there's usually a configuration setup with those. Domotz will continuously look at those configuration files as long as we have SNMP or SSH credentials in those devices, and we will back up those details. We will capture that configuration file, store it in the cloud. As that configuration file changes, we will save off that new configuration. We'll give you the ability to compare what has changed on these devices, and we will highlight those changes, but then we will also give you the ability to alert on that. Not only do we do this for the running configuration, but we also do it for the startup configuration. So if you have a misalignment to the running config and the startup config, we can bring awareness to that. So something I wanted to mention there. But let's get back to connections. You'll notice that under the remote connections, there's also this VPN tunnel capability. So when we have devices that are on the network, we will show all those devices and show you the connections that you can make. But at the top of this page, you will also see the ability to do what we call VPN on demand. Now, most managed service providers understand how to create VPNs, or they're utilizing firewalls to gain access to that. But if you need a secondary way of accessing the network, or if you're an integrator and you don't own the network and you're dealing with an IT department that owns that, you can use this VPN on demand capability to actually create a secure encrypted tunnel to the agent and the network that the agent is residing on. Okay, that subnet, that VLAN that it's residing on, that you have access to. You can do that without having the IT department open up a separate tunnel for you. So there's a lot of power and capability within this. You, of course, are using your own VPN client, such as OpenVPN or TunnelBlick in the case here. I'm not going to create this actual connection, but you'll see how you can create more local or global connections based off of the LAN system that you're on. Once you do create that, your laptop, your mobile device, whatever you're on, now has access to all the devices that are on that local area network that you're monitoring or managing. So that gets me to the point where we've talked not only about how we set up your account, how you activate an agent to discover devices that are on the network. We also have then talked about how you set up proactive alerts on all of these devices. And then lastly, how you can then get in and manage these devices. I encourage all of you to take a look at some of the other information that we provide in here. I will point out in the 201 class, we're going to be talking more details about reporting and logging and how that works, how that can be used for not only auditing purposes, but also be used used for your customers so that you stay engaged with them. So we'll talk a little bit about how to configure and set those up, although I think you'll find it to be quite simple if you take a look at it now. We will talk more about the details of network diagnostics, how we can leverage round-trip delay for validating performance in the network and how we set up alerts on those. We'll also talk about this network security tab and what that means for you and how you can utilize that. And as I briefly showed, right, this search and manage, being able to look across all your agents at devices and then being able to manage those. And I think what's even more powerful now, and this is something that we just released in the very recently within the last few months, we're continuing to improve this, but is the ability to set up your own customized dashboards within your account so that you can see all of the specific details that you want in your systems. In this particular dashboard, I've honed in on Cisco, looking at all of the Cisco-based devices and then information about those. So if SNMP sensors are configured, or if I want to look at whether they're, online up or offline, I can sort these and I can look at these across all the agents out there. This monitoring table setup is an extremely powerful tool, and I think that you're going to find that it's probably going to be one of the most useful portions of Domotz across all of your clients, especially if you're a managed service provider dealing with multiple clientele. The other thing that we're going to go into details on actually has to do with SNMP and setting up SNMP on various sensors. Just to give you a quick look at this, because I know some of you may be interested in how easy or simple. I'll show this real quickly since we have a little bit of time. But if I look at this one example, this is a network-based temperature humidity sensor. When we go to the SNMP tab, as long as those credentials have been set up, which I'm just using the generic ones on this particular device, we can easily go in and add sensors. You'll notice that you can search for just simple words like temp. It will look automatically across all of the MIBs that are associated with this particular device, and it'll bring up the OIDs within those MIBs that has to do with this particular search criteria, which I put the word temp, so it's looking at anything that has temperature in it. You then can easily add or look at the details of these particular sensors. Once you add it, Domotz will immediately start to grab a lot of the details associated with this. Here you can see that we start aggregating data over time. We can look for anomalies. We can set up alerts on particular values. So there's a lot of power within SNMP, as well as just the ease of configuring this. And we're going to talk about, once you've set this up on a particular set of switches or a system, being able to push all that data to multiple agents, so that way it's, as I said before, templated and configured easily, and you don't have to be reinventing the wheel every time. Last thing that I want to mention here about the 201 class is we are going to go into a little bit more detail about alerts, how to configure shared alerts. We're not going to go into specific examples. That's where the help.domotz.com page is so useful. But we will talk about alert digests. We'll talk about snoozing alerts and some of the power there. And then we'll finish up talking about some of the different services that are available to devices or systems like Meraki or Ubiquiti, or even other documentation services, kind of the things that, as you see on the services and drivers, services and drivers tab that you have configured here. I will take this opportunity as well to mention one other thing, which is this custom drivers, which is brand new and in beta, gives you the ability to write your own JavaScript to be able to interrogate devices either through Telnet or SSH or some of the different command lines that are out there. This is something that's fairly complex, but I am taking the opportunity to tell you that we are going to be having a training for this in the second half of January. So I'm excited about that. We'll not only be talking about the power of this, but also be talking about some examples and how to use the different JavaScript libraries that are out there for this. So with that being said, I want to apologize for having a little bit of trouble with the standard video. Usually I like to have that video going so we can answer questions in the background. But let me bring up my questions tab and see what questions we have besides the ones where people can't see the video. Looks like we got a lot of questions answered here. A couple questions that I see. How does Domotz interface with switches and other network devices? I think we talked a little bit about this already, but I will say we use multiple protocols for interfacing with the various devices. I will say that when it comes to discovery of devices, we are starting out at layer 2, meaning the VLAN level. We are fundamentally we're doing ARP requests, looking for all the MACs that are out there, MAC addresses that are out there. And then we're bringing in and looking at layer 3. We're looking at the application layer protocols, all of that across we're using various layers within the OSI model to look at all these details. We are then taking the MAC address along with that other protocol information to enrich that data to discover those devices. And of course, when it comes to discovering which ports are open, we're using some standard network techniques there as well. Here's another good question. How do we handle a non-24 subnet? It's a very good question. So when it comes to, there's a couple things I'll say. So the primary LAN that the Domotz agent is monitoring can actually be set up as a /22. So we can look up to 1,024 devices on that network. You of course have ways of configuring the other VLANs to be in other what I would call subnet ranges, which are actually at /24. Okay. When it comes to this external when it comes to the subnet monitoring, I should say, right, the routed subnet monitoring, you are limited to a /24, but you can put multiple subnets in there, so you can still build out a range. In the user interface, you will see all of the devices discovered within those, and they'll be noted which IP address range or which subnet they are on. So if you need more information about that, or if you want to see some of the ways in which you can configure the different VLANs or a network interface card to look at different subnets, I encourage you to go to help.domotz.com where we have some of that information, or you certainly can write to support@domotz.com. The team there is awesome. They're fast. They've got a lot of networking experience and they can help with a lot of that. Looks like we have a person that has it's using a managed switch that's not using SNMP due to the inherent security issues. That's an interesting position to take. If you're not using SNMP, then you're losing out on a lot of the I think features and capabilities that Domotz has when it comes to monitoring that. But I will also tell you that Domotz has some capabilities through things like SSH to access that. So if you are using SSH, we can look at how we deal with that. The other thing I'll point out is when it comes to firewalls in particular, we are going beyond SNMP and using other support protocols. Of course, as you know, if you lock things down to the point where you can't interrogate them, you're really left with just the standard network protocol monitoring, such as pinging and ARP requests to discover whether those devices are online, offline, et cetera, but you're not going to get some of the stronger management capabilities. Okay, let's see, a couple other questions that are coming in, and I see we have about 2 minutes, so let me pick and choose the ones that we see as more relevant here. When Domotz does its scan, does it go out the VLAN of the device it's scanning? Does it go out the VLAN the device is covering? So I think so in this particular, they had an example where a switch was not being read by SNMP. In this situation, and I suspect what you need to do here for those that ask the question is please email support@domotz.com so they can get in and look at your configuration in particular. But as long as the network interface card that the Domotz agent is hosted on is configured to look at the different VLANs, we should be able to see all those devices and interrogate the systems accordingly. So there really shouldn't be an issue. I suspect that it probably had to do with the way the VLAN was configured, but if I'm not understanding that question properly, I encourage you to reach out to support@domotz.com. Let's see. So let's see, if you run the agent on a Windows device, does it have to be dedicated to that function? The answer is no. So if you have a Windows device, it can run multiple services. Domotz essentially is acting as an application that's running on that. So that's one thing that is easy to configure. It's also one of the reasons that we like people to leverage the Windows agent. It's just super simple to set up and execute. Okay, I've got one last question, and we're at the top of the hour. That question is there any chance that Domotz would look at LLDP as another way of topology building? I'm going to answer that with absolutely. Okay, the way we do our topology mapping today is really based off of, well, it's a proprietary algorithms that we run looking at what I would call the parent-child relationships of the systems. But when it comes to LLDP as well as CDP, so Cisco Discovery Protocol, and for those not familiar with LLDP, LLDP is Link Layer Discovery Protocol, very commonly used in network infrastructure devices to understand how the different, as it says, links are layered together within each of the network infrastructure devices. One thing that LLDP is really good for is looking at when systems go across VPNs or when they may be linking over a layer 3 component. Our system isn't looking at that today, but we absolutely have it on our very near-term roadmap to enable, I'm going to say, enrichment of our topology map with not only our proprietary algorithms, but also with LLDP. So, well, I thank you, everybody, for your time today. We're right at the top of the hour, maybe a little bit over. If we didn't get to your questions, please email support@domotz.com. This is being recorded. We have our historical view of our past webinars, so you can see those as well. And we'll be doing a 201 webinar in about 2 weeks. Thanks again for your time. We look forward to talking to you and see you soon.